Hi, everyone. Welcome back. And today we have an amazing topic of conversation. I want to thank my sponsors, the Health Channel and the Ready Check Go program by Thermo Fisher, and also the I Remember Against Genocide bracelet, which educates people against hate crimes and is also a big supporter of the power of the heels. And before I introduce our guest today, I have to say that Fabio is also a supporter of the Power of the Heels program and the Loving Me More for the girls. So Fabio, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Lex.
So we're talking airplanes today. And the cool thing is that you're sitting on one of your planes. So we get to know a little bit of a different background.
Yes.
So Fabio, planes have been on the news in the last week for many, many reasons. So we're gonna go through a lot of things. But first of all, explain to everyone, for us that we don't know how it works, what's going on with the towers, the cell phone towers and the 5G that's affecting the planes.
So the debate that I shouldn't say debate, the discrepancy and the concern for the airlines and the community, the consumers that use the airlines for flights in and out of the airports, the 5G rollout of towers that are in the vicinity of these airports is the airline's concern. Hence the reason for their projected cancellations that they said that they needed to do, because the FAA and the powers to be, the providers like Verizon and AT&T, they were going to turn on their towers around these airports. That was going to affect service to not only the communities, but also to the airlines that use what is called a radio altimeter that uses that same frequency. And this is something that has needed to be cleaned up, but the parties to be apparently weren't all on the same page. And having said that, Verizon and AT&T have postponed their activation of these towers for a more of a complete 5G rollout until they come to terms with the airline community and the FAA on how to do that without affecting the airplanes that fly in and out of these airports.
Okay, so let me ask you a few things. Why only Verizon and AT&T? What happens with T-Mobile?
Well, they might be part of that same group, but they're the two biggest providers. So AT&T and Verizon have the largest portfolio of cell towers. So not to say that the other providers aren't affected as well, but the two biggest providers obviously provide the biggest bandwidth because they have the most towers.
So isn't this like a poor planning issue?
Well, anybody can point fingers as to who's at fault here.
No, and I'm not pointing fingers, but I want to understand that if I'm rolling out a 5G, which is supposed to be a bigger capacity, because now we're all depending.
Well, let's just say that like any big rollout of 5G, it's first they try to go into the communities and they decide on which areas they want to fill that 5G gaps, because we still have 5G gaps all over the country. And to have a full 5G rollout, obviously they have to fill a lot of that geography. So I think it just has come to time. The time has come that they need to activate these towers that are in the community so they can have a good 5G rollout. And they haven't been on the same page with the FAA and the airlines as to, hey, wait a minute, this can affect us. What can we do to compromise here? And that hasn't been taken care of. Hence the delay of activating those towers, which it's agreed to between the parties, that the delay is happening and they're going to work this out. As to when they're going to solve that, I don't know. Does that mean it's going to affect your 5G rollout? No, not unless you live close to these airports. I haven't seen the list of airports of where these rollouts are, in case you ask me, but there is 5G rolling out throughout the country. And some places have it, some places don't. This is just a broader footprint for them to expand. That hasn't happened yet.
So bottom line, if 5G gets rolled out, it's a really good thing for the cell phone companies. And if it does, it's not a good thing for the airline industry, because
it's not good for the airline industry if that concern continues and they haven't figured out how to handle that 5G possible interruption into the airplane's navigation, being the radio altimeter, which tells the airplane where and how high it is from the ground when it's close to the proximity of airports.
Okay, that was my next question, so thank you for answering. Going back a little bit.
Sure.
I know you started fueling cars and airplanes. And now you have your own charter company. Can you tell us how you started?
So I'll try to give you the nickel tour on how fast I can do this in your podcast. But in the short term, my family moved from Chicago after the blizzard of '79, and my dad took his savings and bought a gas station in Marathon in the Florida Keys. And he bought the business, not the property. And the property had the concessions of fuel. And at that time in the 80s, they had above ground tanks for the gas stations here in Florida until they mandated them in the ground. But during that time, that was back when there was full serve and self-serve. And then during the full serve side of my dad's business, I was pumping gas in cars. Until the mandate came in Florida that you had to put the tanks in the ground. And as my family was economically trying to get ahead by buying this little gas station for $5,000, as if I recall correctly, they didn't buy the property, and the owner of the property did not want to make the investment to put it in the ground of his property that he was leasing to us. So that really hurt us. And this was a time when I was going to go to junior college and finish my 2 years and go into the Air Force. Well, that didn't happen. So I was helping my family with their dilemma of not being able to sell fuel at their convenience store, or in other words, losing the convenience status of a convenience store. And since they couldn't really pay me and we weren't selling fuel, I saw an ad for fueling airplanes. And I said, wow, how cool can this be? Did not know if I could qualify or whatever. And I went and applied for the part-time job and got the part-time job fueling planes. And it was the job that I never looked at my watch. You know, you love what you do when you don't look at your watch, and you know that time just goes by. And I really fell in love with fueling planes. I got to meet the shortest form of a Harvard education from the customers that would base their planes there, that would give me 5 to 20 minutes of their time telling me how they had their, what I call, widget success stories. None of the companies that were of these people that had their planes based were anything sexy to talk about, because some of them made screws, some of them made hangers, some of them made glassware, some of them had factories, but they would just tell me a lot of the attributes of what they did to be successful. And I, like a sponge, sucked it in. And during that time, I was learning how to fly. I was learning how to fly, and I was still fueling airplanes. I ran into an organization called Brothers to the Rescue, which was a Cuban and Argentinian founded organization to search and find Cuban rafters during the 90s. And while I was learning how to fly, the organization, specifically Guillermo Lares, the chief pilot, asked me, hey, gringo, because that's what they would call me since I was born in Chicago, why don't you come fly with us and do something good? And I did. And little did I know that that was the same organization that would rescue me when I became unemployed after Hurricane Andrew hit South Florida and hurt the tourism in the Keys. And I became unemployed. And 10 months later, the same storm that took my job away gave me my job back, fueling planes in Tamiami, which was recovering from Hurricane Andrew. And to shorten the story from there, our boss sold an airplane to another predominant aviation entrepreneur in town named Ben Quevedo. And he liked the idea of gas stations fueling private planes. And we expanded from Tamiami to Opelika, not knowing that one day it would be mine. And that company I worked for would file bankruptcy, and I would take a chance on my 2 credit cards after they had shut down. And I'm sorry?
That's how you funded it on your 2 credit cards?
And yes, and the rest was history. And then I sold the company back in 2015 and kept my charter company, which was a separate company that has airplanes that I own and that I manage for others to fly other people for compensation from point A to point B with an FAA charter certificate.
That's like the American dream.
Well, I would like to think
Well,
it's everybody's dream.
I
It's
know.
everybody's dream, but
the
more
dream,
so
but
here in
the-
America, right?
Right. Going forward a little bit, I've heard from, and I recently talked to the owner of Aerocraft, and they were telling me about how the industry was affected because of the pandemic.
Mhm.
So tell me a little bit about that, because I had a total misconception on how the industry went.
Okay, so well, let me ask you a question. What was your misconception before I answer
Well,
that
I
question?
actually thought that the industry of airplanes was booming because it was like the perfect scenario for somebody who had the means to travel only privately
Mhm.
during the pandemic when everything is shut. So if you have a house in the Keys and you have a private plane, you don't need to be in contact with anyone.
So a few things. Let's moving on from that. There's a lot of conceptions and misconceptions about the private side and the airline side, and them being mutually exclusive. And we are very much different, as much as we are exclusive in the way for those that can afford to fly in the airlines versus those that can fly private. The industry in itself really boomed, I would say, again on the third world event for the private side. And the first world event that really put us on the map was after 9/11, where the airlines obviously laid off a lot of people after the Twin Towers went down due to a terrorist attack, and people that were flying commercially that had the means and wanted to look at alternatives looked at private flying. So that was one shot in the arm, one world event. The second world event was during what a lot of people call the Great Recession of 2008. And even though those that had money had bigger airplanes and were in the private side, had to reduce their access to either owning an airplane, they were still chartering if they had sold their airplane. So we still got a shot in the arm there because people still wanted.
They didn't go back to flying commercial. They just,
Well, they
now?
just sold their airplane, and the charter business started to boom even more because they downsized, if you will. Instead of owning the asset, you know what, we can't really afford it. These are, tough times, so let's be conservative, sell the plane, let's fly private through a charter company. And then the third world event, as I would call it, obviously COVID. And what happened there? We were all shut down in March going into April, like many businesses were, including the private side. And once I would say the evolution of COVID back in 2020 started to show its ugly face, and what are we going to do? A lot of and businesses started opening up and figuring out how they can operate during COVID. Well, we basically went through COVID procedures of disinfecting the planes, making sure we had masks, making sure we had hand sanitizer, having our own COVID protocols. And people started to realize, whoa, if we're going to be quarantined at any place, we're not going to be stuck in New York in a condominium or a penthouse or what have you, or in any other major city. We're going to fly private, and we're going to go somewhere where we at least can be quarantined in some of the best geography in the United States, like the Florida Keys, because you're going to be quarantined at home, but you're going to be in the back of a boat and go farm the biggest farmland that you can have, which is the Atlantic Ocean or the Gulf of Mexico. So people would fly to either the Florida Keys or to a farm or somewhere in rural America where at least they had control of their environment, but not feel totally quarantined. And that really exploded for the industry, which here we are in 2022, and the industry is just continues to blossom. And I will leave you with this one statistic, which sets us apart from the airlines. The airlines only have access to 500 commercially certified and categorized airports by the FAA. We in the private side, in the US, and we on the private side of flying, those who from the charter side and those who own their own airplanes, we can fly to 5,000 private airports plus the 500 airports that the airlines can fly into. So we have a 10-to-1 advantage over the airlines of having access to more airports than they do. They cannot fly into our private side of our airports unless it's emergency or unless that airline size airplane is a designated charter airplane.
So you have a huge advantage. Yeah, it wasn't a misconception.
No.
It was that. Yesterday, there was a big news about how a big jetliner, American Airlines, had to cancel their flight and come back an hour after heading to London because of an unruly passenger that didn't want to wear a mask.
Yeah, that seems to be happening a lot.
So why fly if you're not willing to wear a mask?
Well, how that person got on the airplane with a mask, or maybe he had the mask and took it off, who decided to rebel, that person is going to pay a fine. And wearing a mask and to take a, how should I say, a very cautious position here. Even though we're not medical professionals in the medical industry, they wear a mask for a reason, for when they're handling sick patients or in surgery. Obviously, we're not in an operating room or tending to people. But if there's a mandate there that's saying, hey, you need to wear a mask to respect others, and that's the rule of the airline, and you do not adhere to it, you're going to adhere to a very expensive penalty from the FAA. And it's unfortunate. It doesn't happen that often, but when it does happen, it's obviously news. And to turn an airplane back from London, I would assume there's a lot of people that really dislike that person who screwed up their plans to fly across to see their loved ones in London or to close a deal.
I'm assuming that this is going to create a whole snowball effect, and not in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the size of the airplane was, but assuming it's 100 to 150 passengers or more, going, to London for either business, pleasure, or other, that just got very inconvenienced by one passenger, and it's a shame.
Oh, it's totally a shame, because what we're going through, if each one puts their little granito,
right,
their little seed, we can get out of it.
Yeah, and you know what? Everybody has an opinion on this topic, and whether you believe the science or not, it took science to fly that person, to have that airplane take off, to go to the altitude at just under the speed of sound, let's say 650 miles an hour, which what the airlines fly at, speed of sound is at 700. That took science to do that. So you can choose whatever side of science you want to be, but the science exists. So you can decide which side you want to be. But if you defy it, science is not going to be on your side.
You said something before, that we're not doing surgery, but my dad was a surgeon, and I remember when he had 18-hour surgeries, that he came home with the mark of the mask. Mm-hmm. And if the surgery was complicated, they fed him like peanuts under the mask. He didn't even take the mask off to eat.
Wow.
Because it was like a serious surgery, and nothing happened. He just left out of surgery and they took their mask off and nothing happened. So, like you said, science is there for a reason.
Yeah. And I'm not saying science is the reason you wear a mask. You wear a mask to basically have as close as you can to a sterile environment. And surgery obviously is more sterile than any other environment. So obviously, when you're flying with volumes of people, we need to have some safeguards to do the best to, limit whatever spread of any germs that we have that could cause any ill will to another passenger, whether you have COVID or not. But we're in those times that mandates a mask.
Correct. That we remember when the Asian people used to fly here, they used to wear a mask, and we saw them like even what's going on, and now it's a normal thing to wear a mask.
And if people remember Ebola during 2014, 13, no one was mandating us to wear masks, and everybody, I wouldn't say everybody, the majority of Asia was wearing masks.
Was wearing a mask.
They've always taken it a lot more serious than we have. But not to take away to our society, I think for as much as we dislike wearing masks, and myself included, no one really wants to wear a mask, but you know what? It's a very small inconvenience to do what we need to do our part.
Correct. Now, you one question. A lot of the big airlines put the blue light in the bathrooms. Does that work to clean to get rid of the germs and everything?
Well, I can't speak to the blue light so much, but I can speak to the filtration systems of the airlines. The majority of the airlines, both private and commercial, have excellent filtration systems in their circulation of air, both in the AC and the ductwork and the filter systems. They reach a lot of the HEPA quality filters that take 98% of the germs out of the air. So, and people might say, well, if it does it so well, why do we have to wear a mask? Because there's constant air coming into the cabin and out of the cabin, both when you get on the cabin and the door closes and it's contained and you clean the cabin as much as you can, and then you land on the other side and then you expose the cabin to another door that's open to another area that may not have the same filtration systems as the airplane.
So that's why it is so.
No, that's why again, I'm not speaking to the blue light.
No. The blue light, I understand. You're not speaking to that. But it's really good to understand the whole filtration system and why the mask is still important. So thank you for clarifying that. And with that, our time is literally over. Fabio, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I hope that they can figure out the whole 5G, because now we all depended on internet.
They will. They'll figure it out.
They'll figure it out. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. And everybody, stay safe above all, and see you next week. Have a great day.
Thank you.